They're two happy women bringing you inspiring stories, politics, pop culture, and lifestyle hacks, all with an eye to making our communities and our country a better place to live. It's the Happy Women Podcast with your hosts, Jen Horn and Katie Gorka.
Finally, answers to just what was up with those drones, where COVID came from, and what was really behind the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., John F. Kennedy, and Robert F. Kennedy. Ooh, we are moving at the speed of Trump. Welcome to the Happy Women Podcast. I'm Jennifer Horn.
And I'm Katie Gorka.
And we have lots to talk about today. We are literally just over a week in on the Trump presidency. And Katie, we're getting answers to questions that I think many of us probably thought we wouldn't hear in our lifetime. We are seeing actions that have put our country in a better position in literally 7 days. I mean, it's amazing to me. Just anecdotally, and I know that we've all talked about this, on day one of the Trump presidency, when he starts signing executive orders while he is talking to the mainstream news media and answering questions, it was so clear the difference in leadership and the difference just in personality of Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Joe Biden was being run behind the scenes. They were using him as a figurehead for unnamed people to do things that put our country in such a terrible position. But I feel like we're back. And President Trump is talking to the news media. He is acting swiftly. No time for things to operate at the speed of government. We truly are at warp Trump speed, and I am loving it.
Not only over 300 executive orders and actions, but he had the time to go see the people in Western North Carolina, the people who have suffered through these terrible fires in Pacific Palisades in Southern California, and to go thank his voters in Las Vegas. I mean,
and that was in less than 24 hours.
This man is tireless. But I tell you, the other thing that is just such a sign that this is a completely different day is the very different attitude of all the different people who are working for him.
Yeah.
You know, we've talked about this before. This is a very different Trump. And I think it's really a blessing. I know many of us have said this now. I think it's actually really an incredible blessing that he did not win in 2020, because he is a very different man than he was in 2020. He has much greater resolve. But the other thing is, the people that have come in alongside him to serve in his administration are also extremely different. You know, not only did you have a lot of people in that first administration who were actually trying to subvert him, or were not on board with the Trump agenda, or, you know, maybe just didn't even respect him. You know, they thought they knew better, right?
Like a joke. Yeah.
And you see such a difference in his appointees today. I mean, I love the fact that you've already had John Ratcliffe has been in office as the new director of the CIA for just a couple of days. He's already come out and revealed that, in fact, the CIA had an assessment that COVID came out of a lab from China, but they didn't release that under the Biden administration. I find that incredible. Yet another thing that's just also super, super exciting is the pick for the DC U.S. Attorney. Ed Martin has already come out and said he's launching a probe of the January 6th prosecutions. Where's all this good news going to stop? It's amazing.
And the acting AG coming out and putting about 50 FBI and CIA workers, some of the deep state that we've talked about, on permanent vacation. These are amazing, amazing steps to try to get some transparency back in our government. I don't want to downplay, though, what you said. John Ratcliffe coming out, already going to work. Marco Rubio already going to work as the Secretary of State. So with this COVID revelation, this will be something that continues to wake people up in our country, because COVID impacted everybody. You didn't have to be politically engaged to know that you couldn't go to church, or you didn't have to be politically engaged to know that you had to get a vaccine or you were going to lose your job in the military or in law enforcement, or you didn't have to be watching to know that you couldn't go to a restaurant in Los Angeles without showing a vaccine card. I mean, just ridiculous things that impacted our life. Our businesses shut down. Many people had loved ones die in hospitals all by themselves. Those last precious moments taken away from people, kids out of school. And we knew in 2020, President Trump said he thought that it came from the Chinese lab. And what happened? Dr. Fauci, I'd like to remind People magazine, the world's sexiest man alive a couple of years ago. evaluate yourself, maybe too many vaccines in that person that chose them. But you've got Dr. Fauci coming out there saying that was a lie because he's trying to cover his own rear end, because he may have allegedly had something to do with the gain of function research that just happened to slip out of that lab. But you have these people lying to us. And when President Trump brought it up, literally 5 years ago now, back in 2020, he was laughed at. People who questioned COVID and the government's reaction were ostracized, were marginalized, had their social media taken away, had their really big things taken from them. And this one is really outrageous to me. I'm glad we're getting the information now, because thankfully John Ratcliffe is in there at the CIA saying, yeah, this was a theory that we were looking into. But this one stings because this had such a negative impact on so many people and a whole generation of kids. I mean, it's just
what I think is going to be
rough.
Really, really interesting about this is that it's not only going to tell us actually what really was the source of the COVID outbreak, but almost more importantly, why was it so important for the Biden administration to maintain the narrative that it didn't come out of a lab? Why was the COVID lie so important to the Biden administration? And I can only see two answers. One is either because it was to protect Fauci and funding of the, and I'm sure there are going to be others, but Fauci and those who made the decisions to fund this gain of function research at the Wuhan lab. Or was it because they really did see it as an opportunity to manipulate the election? And if you ask me, or it could even be both. But I think this is going to be a really important piece to come out of these revelations.
Look, I can tell you, I think there's a little bit of everything. First of all, I don't know if the government had any reason to help Fauci protect himself. I think that was Fauci's doing. I think it is just my personal opinion that he's a bad guy. So I don't know if that's at the bottom of it. I do think that there was an element of control of people that leftists really liked. That's why they do everything by fear mongering, because they do want to protect us for our own good, because they want to take away people's personal responsibility. I think that's a piece of it. But honestly, for me, what is at the bottom of all of this is China. I believe that the Biden administration wanted to protect China. I believe that the Biden family has taken money from China. I believe that they were owned and operated in some way by China. And I think that the left also has a lot of interest in making sure that China prospers at our expense. It's the reason they let a Chinese spy balloon run across the entire country without saying anything. And China had a lot to gain from COVID. Not only did it disrupt our economy and made them stronger and us weaker, not only did it kill a lot of people, which I'm sure they love to see, to create fear. And in a way, it's a form of terrorism. But remember what they did. And I think a lot of people have forgotten this. When COVID broke out, they made so many deals with other countries to dole out the PPE that was needed. So I can tell you France is a prime example of this. France needed masks because they believed that masks would do the trick. Masks and all of the protective equipment that they could get their hands on. China would not give it to them unless France agreed to let their 5G communication satellites go in their country. China has now the ability to spy on the large part of the globe because they used it as a negotiating tool to give people the protective equipment that they thought they needed to save lives. And so this to me is what it's all about. And I think we have even deeper problems that we're going to be uncovering with some of the things and the inroads that were allowed to be given to China to increase their power and decrease ours. And by the way, not just ours. This is for countries around the world.
Okay, so I have an important question for you. You know, we know that the Biden administration was in the pocket of China. They not only had poured millions of dollars into the Biden crime family, but also, you know, had the power to blackmail, really.
Yeah.
So clearly the Chinese wanted Biden in office. They clearly wanted him as the president. So do you think somewhere this was used as a way was COVID used as a way to help control the election and get Biden elected? That's
I think it's
what I need to know.
I think it's really possible. And by the way, on just a little side note, and maybe it's worth talking to her again. Jen Van Laar was a guest on our podcast a few months back with Red State. She has so much reporting on the elements of China and on Fauci. She was one of the first independent journalists who was really kind of uncovering all of this stuff years ago. All the stuff that we're having these great revelations about, she reported on, including Hunter Biden. There was not just one laptop that was lost by Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden lost a laptop when he was on a trip with his dad. Now, where do you think we would ever hear about this in the mainstream news media? Do you think we would ever know that it's possible that China had access to some of the information on Hunter Biden's laptop, prime for blackmailing opportunities? I mean, there's a lot more here that we probably will never even know about, but we should. It'd be worth having a conversation with her again, because some of this stuff is amazing that it just got swept under the rug because there's no curiosity in mainstream news media anymore. All right. So COVID is one of the things that we've learned about at the CIA. We also learned about the release, and this is a direct order from President Trump, actually, not just on the badge of honor for John Radcliffe, but releasing the documents pertaining to the assassination attempt of the Ks, Martin Luther King Jr., John F. Kennedy, and Robert F. Kennedy. I think there are a lot of people who are excited about this. I just say proceed with caution, because I don't think you're going to get a lot from these documents. If there is a CIA worth being a CIA, they're not going to write down that Bob in HR pulled the trigger on Kennedy. It's just not going to happen. They're going to give you the story they want you to know. So I'm very happy that the files have been released. I think it helps answer questions. It shows that Trump wants to be transparent. I would just say don't hold your breath on getting a lot of great information from those files. They have been scrubbed and scrubbed in the last 50 years that they've been into somebody's desk drawer.
All right, here's one of the other things that I'm super excited about personally, because I've spent a lot of my career living in foreign countries. I spent 12 years living in Hungary. I have seen some of the many ways that the United States has wasted unbelievable dollars in foreign countries, that some of the many ways that we've used massive amounts of tax dollars to prop up bad regimes or to push our progressive social agenda in foreign countries. I love that Marco Rubio put a 90-day hold on U.S. foreign aid, and every single recipient of foreign aid has to make their case anew for why that aid should be received. I think this
Amen.
is just brilliant. I love it.
I love to see this too. And this is part of the overspending that our country does, right? We love to hand piles of money to anybody who really has their hand out. So I think this is a great step. And just even to take it a little bit further, I think it might have been in Nevada, actually, when President Trump was there on his whirlwind day last Friday. There's a great soundbite that's floating around where he says, maybe we should just get rid of the IRS. We are charging people. We bring so much money in from American tax dollars, but where does that money go? And he's brought up what a lot of conservatives are saying, and that is that we have a spending problem. And so by putting this stop on foreign aid, by making people reapply, he also put a pause on some of these government agencies that are non-essential, hiring freezes and pause, so that we can actually reevaluate and see which departments are actually necessary. And if, by the way, all of these departments and individuals and pet projects that cost the taxpayer so much money actually carry out parts of the plan for the Trump administration, that the mandate that was given to him by the American people to fulfill those promises, that those government agencies are actually going to work in sync with that. So I love seeing that. I would love to see him. He's talking about abolishing the IRS. I would love to see that. I've always been an advocate for the sales tax. I don't know if we're there yet, but truly we have a spending problem. We don't have an earnings problem in the country.
So true. All right. What about the fact that he has said we are not going to consult with the World Health Organization anymore? I think that's a great one. Exactly. I'm excited about that.
Well, especially when they misled us on COVID, or at least that's what we believe they did. Why would we do it? And by the way, moving away from some of these conspiracies, not quite yet, the drones. At the very first press briefing that Caroline Leavitt held, and by the way, she did a phenomenal job. She didn't look nervous. I mean, she was amazing. That has to be rough to pull yourself out on that stage in front of a podium filled with a room full of vipers, but she did it. She looked great up there. She was so great because last week on President Trump's day one, as he was signing those executive orders, one of the questions was from a reporter who said, "What about the drones?" And he said, "You know what? I don't know. I want to know about those drones. They've been flying over my house. They were flying over Bedminster. So he said to Susie Wiles, his new chief of staff, he's like, hey, can you look into this so we can get back to you? And sure enough, literally a week and a day to the day, you had the answer coming out from Caroline Leavitt, who didn't give a tremendous amount of information, but she said that these were all drones that were operated with approval by the FAA, that they were American drones, that they were not our enemies, which is great information to know. And that a lot of the hoopla and hysteria was that people just started seeing a lot of drones once some of the drones were actually identified. And so there were a lot, like 5,000 calls, I think, to the FBI in certain areas of the East Coast, reporting things that were either airplanes or that were just commercial drones or whatever it might have been. So it seems that at least the FAA knew what was going on up there, which should make us feel better. At least we know it's not China or Iran trying to take us out or try to gain information or intelligence, especially over some of those big targets like Trump's home in New Jersey.
But it's a perfect example of exactly what was wrong with the Biden administration. Yeah. They knew there was this hysteria. They knew that there was a very real fear amongst people, and they did nothing to dispel it. They did nothing to come out and explain it. And shame on them. This is on them.
And if anything, John Kirby would come out and give like 12 different answers about the same question. So then you just automatically think that they're lying about it and that it's a cover-up.
Yeah, he was absolutely terrible. Yeah. I mean, we say it again and again, but I think that one of the most appealing things about the Trump administration and his picks is the transparency. Finally, it feels like we have a government of the people and for the people.
One of the things that Caroline Leavitt said in her first press conference, too, is that President Trump will be the greatest and best spokesperson for this administration. And it would be her job basically to fill in the gaps. Could you ever say that about Joe Biden?
Sorry.
And I quote, pony soldier. There's nothing there. Now, one of the other things that President Trump has floated is a revamp, or maybe even just throwing it out altogether, of FEMA. And I brought this up because we haven't had a chance to chat really in detail about President Trump's trip to Los Angeles to talk to the fire victims. And that crazy day, as we referenced, he went to Asheville, North Carolina. He toured some of the damage there, did a press conference, said that FEMA needs major help, and brought up the fact that the locals particularly are more able, at least in most states, that's the caveat, because in California, I think it's up for debate. But in most states, the local government is able to better serve the people who need the help better. They just do it better than the federal government. One of the major issues with North Carolina is that FEMA was unaware about how to get the resources up to Asheville. Asheville is in a pretty remote area. The locals knew, but the federal government didn't know. And there was a huge disconnect getting them federal resources. So Trump's saying maybe we don't even need FEMA, or we need to do a better job. He comes to Los Angeles, and Katie came with Melania, who I feel like is Melania 2.0. I mean, she was out there engaging, exchanging pleasantries and hugs with the people who were affected by this fire, touring with President Trump every step of the way. And you had people in the Palisades who were connecting with Trump more than they will ever connect with Karen Bass. A lot of you have probably seen that press conference, and I think we even have a little audio for you here.
And the resource. I am more worried because I met at least 8 groups of homeowners, and I'm much more worried about the fact that they said it's 18 months exactly, and they were devastated. They want to start now. They want to start removing things. They're not allowed to do it now. And you mentioned hazardous waste. Well, the hazardous waste. What's hazardous waste? I mean, you're going to have to define that. We're going to go through a whole series of questions on determining what's hazardous?
Nope.
I just think you have to allow the people to go on their site and start the process tonight.
Of President Trump sitting on a panel with local Los Angeles officials and with Mayor Karen Bass. And what you didn't see in the room is that there were several residents from Pacific Palisades sitting across from President Trump at that round table. And when Karen Bass said it would take at least another week for them to get back into their homes after being out for 3 weeks, keep in mind this fire situation has been going on for almost a month now. It was January 7th when it started. And this woman started to cry. She starts weeping because all the residents want to do is get back into their homes, or at least take a look to see if they can recover anything. I mean, imagine that. You know your house is gone, but maybe you want to get your grandmother's wedding ring and see if it's still there.
Yeah.
Or you want to find something. You want to just see it. And they haven't been able to get back in. She starts crying, and you don't see this on camera. President Trump sees it. And that's when he starts pushing back against Mayor Bass. That was the catalyst for the pushback, is that he sees this woman crying. And when she says, we're going to get you back in a week, he says, that's not good enough. Well, I'm happy to tell you that there was rain the weekend after he left. But on Monday, those residents started to get back in. Now, not quickly enough, the city of Los Angeles stepped in and required everybody to have a police escort because they want to keep us safe. And I'm using air quotes here. So people had to wait, Katie, 5 hours to get to their home on Monday. But the very least, at least they were able to get back in. And that was because of the pressure applied by President Trump. Now, he embarrassed Karen Bass. She looked feckless. She looked inadequate. And she looked overplayed in that meeting. And so she has come out now and gotten an executive to help her oversee the rebuilding process. And today, as we record this, the LA Times reported that she's now hiring a contractor to oversee the rebuilding process without consulting the neighborhood. So here's her timeline. After President Trump was there and demanding that this be done immediately, that people can go in if they want to take the risk and clean up their own properties and not wait for the environmental nonsense and the permitting. Karen Bass has come in and as of today said that she is going to create a system where either the EPA or the Army Corps of Engineers have to clean people's property, or they have to hire a contractor. If they don't have the money to hire a contractor, the city will do it for them. But she's going back to the fact that people will not be able to clean up their own lots, and that they're going to have a step 2, which means that they can start bringing contractors in. I'm going to tell you right now that there is going to be a war between President Trump when he hears about this, and he's engaged with this, and the local leaders who are not thinking about the humanity and instead thinking about signing permits. And it was laughable. Just one more thing. Today in the local news, they were touting the fact that they rescued, and you know I'm an animal lover. This has nothing to do with animals, but they rescued endangered steelhead trout from a river, and they were able to rehome the 250 steelhead trout. My question is, did they have to call the EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers for a permit for those trout, or did they just allow them to go to a new home and set up a new habitat? The answer is there were no permits for the dang fish. I mean, it's just
one of the things
very frustrating
that really stood out for me in the exchange with Trump talking with the residents of the Pacific Palisades was he said, if you let these people just go in there, they'd probably have their lots cleared up in 24 hours. Let them have a dumpster. You know that they'll get it done rather than in the 7 months, it's going to take the government. So I think, this idea of abolishing FEMA and the whole idea of the inefficiency of government, a lot of people don't understand this as one of the core principles of conservatism is not that we don't think things need to get done. It's just that the government is probably the least efficient way to do it. And certainly the federal government is the least efficient way. I've been watching this problem for years. Remember, it was a disaster when FEMA went in for Hurricane Katrina to New Orleans.
A mess.
Then when I was in DHS in the Trump administration, that we had the terrible hurricanes in Florida and Puerto Rico. I think FEMA did a slightly better job, but it was still not a very good job. And now we have the disaster of how they've responded in Western North Carolina. And what people don't realize is, okay, it's incredibly inefficient, first of all. And you have to understand, senior executives in FEMA and elsewhere, they're making like $180,000 a year, not to mention the benefits. These are really expensive employees. They're getting paid these big government salaries to sit up here in expensive Washington, D.C. versus what NGOs are able to do, what locals are able to do. If they're local, they're able to come up with local solutions, local resources, things that are more responsive, things that actually work in that environment. So as crazy as it sounded that it might be time to abolish FEMA, I thought it was actually one of the best ideas I've heard Trump express yet.
Because and the thing that I said, special caveat, when I said most of the local states are able to handle themselves better than the federal government, I really think that's true. Now, in California's case, it's not, because we've seen what the government in California has done when given large sums of money. It doesn't get to the people that it needs to go to. They dump it into black holes. They want to create slush funds to take on Trump so that they can Trump-proof the state while people suffer. Joel Pollack, our buddy from Breitbart News, was actually at the table with President Trump and spoke up about his experience. He didn't lose his home, thankfully, but all of his neighbors have been wiped out. He was one of the lucky ones, and he talked about his experience. And he also mentioned to President Trump the idea of a special master. So after 9/11, there was a special master that was assigned to oversee the federal government allocating money. And so he suggested to President Trump that that be the same situation for California, that there is at least somebody who looks at where the California electeds are spending it, not to add more bureaucracy, but to add a layer of protection. And Trump looked at Rick Grinnell right away, who was there as that person. But it's going to have to be included in the congressional bill. When they approve funding, Congress is going to have to include a special master as a condition. And we'll see what happens there. But again, some promises of big changes coming to FEMA. Another thing from President Trump. One other that is probably the biggest is the incomplete turnaround at the southern border. I was listening to Fox News this week in the morning, Fox and Friends, and both Bill Malugin and Griff Jenkins, who have been their border reporters for all intents and purposes over the last few years, were talking about the complete difference between this week and 3 weeks ago. He said it's like and they're describing it almost as a ghost town, that no one is trying to come in. And this is what's actually causing the cartels, if you've heard the stories about some of the violence and the cartels shooting into the country, because they're missing out on millions of dollars a day because their trafficking business has stopped. They're not able to bring people in because people are not wanting to take the risk of coming in and having to go back home. Huge turnaround. In the first week, we also learned over 7,000 people have been deported. And not just people, we're talking about criminal people who have been here. Some of them are global fugitives, we're hearing. Some of them are murderers. Some of them are child rapists. This is not the best and the brightest. But as you can imagine, seeing these deportations causing some freak out by leftists, particularly in Hollywood. Selena Gomez, who I think is a great actress. She's adorable. I love Only Murders in the Building. But she also produced a Netflix documentary about illegal immigrants in our country. And so she lost her mind on earlier in this week and had this to say. She released this video on Instagram. Take a listen.
I just want to say that I'm so sorry. All my people are getting attacked. The children. I don't understand. I'm so sorry. I wish I could do something, but I can't. I don't know what to do. I'll try everything, I promise.
Now, Katie, this video did not get met with great response. In fact, a lot of people came at her and said, where were those tears for the women who were raped and murdered by illegal immigrants in this country? To the parents who lost their kids to drunk drivers who were in this country illegally, where were your tears then? So she actually took the video down pretty lickety split and put up a post that replaced it that said, I guess empathy is no longer appreciated. But this is just the problem. When you have a group of liberals and maybe even younger liberals who get all of their news from TikTok or from left-wing media outlets that think that the Trump administration is like going into schools and pulling kids out of the classroom. That's been one of their narratives. All they're doing is making it easier. And Tom Homan has said this, the borders are making it easier so that you don't have criminals using schools and churches as a safe space. You're able to go in and get an MS-13 gang member in a school if it's necessary to do so.
Oh, and the other point that she completely neglects is the degree to which children have been trafficked as a way to get adults across the border. I mean, we've talked about this before because I worked for Customs and Border Protection for a while. I got to go down to the border. I got to see the kids. I mean, I remember the one that really got to me the most was seeing a girl who was probably maybe 6 or 7 years old. She had Down syndrome. An adult male had come across the border with her. And because he was with a child, he was not sent back. But then the second they got across the border, he abandoned her and off he went. So now, I mean, I still wonder what happened to that poor girl. There are thousands of children like that who were trafficked by adults as a way to get themselves across the border. I want to see Selena Gomez's sympathy for them.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll put a pin in that and come back. I do want to see that same sympathy. I mean, it's so misplaced. But in our final second here, we are very close to Valentine's Day. So we want to get you thinking, what do you do to celebrate Valentine's Day? Do you just go, it's a Hallmark holiday? Or are you a big Valentine's Day fan? And Katie, we're going to talk about that in a coming episode, right?
I love it. Yes.
All right. So get thinking, leave in the comments, wherever you're listening to this, leave us in the comments what you like to do. If you think it's a waste of money, like a scam, or if you like it. I like it. I mean, I know that's no big surprise, but we'll cover it. All right. Thank you so much for joining us. Make sure you get Katie's book. It's called Next Gen Marxism, available right now wherever you get your books. Check her out, katiegorka.org. And find her on Facebook. Search for Catherine Gorka or on X, Gorka Katie. You can find me on social media too, Jennifer Horn Radio on Instagram and Facebook, and at Jennifer Horn on X and on Truth. And as per usual, we thank you so much for listening and for sharing Happy Women with your friends. Those 5-star reviews really do help us, guys. So help keep spreading the word about Happy Women. And you can connect with us on all of our platforms at SalemPodcastNetwork.com. Thanks for joining us. It's another episode of the Happy Women Podcast.